All right, everyone. Hello, my name is Josephine Akingbulu, and I would like to welcome you to the Autism Intervention Research Network on Physical Health, the AARP August 2022 webinar. So thank you all for joining us today. Because of the number of participants, your audio will be muted throughout the call. However, you can submit questions at any point during the presentation via the Q&A feature on the chat box on your webinar console. Just a friendly reminder to please be respectful when communicating in the chat and asking questions, and note that only questions or comments pertaining to the presentation will be addressed. This entire webinar is being recorded and will be available on the AARP website, which I will put in the chat. You may also view the presenter slides to follow the presentation on our Google Drive archive. I will make sure to put both links in the chat for your perusal. There will be a short evaluation survey at the close of the webinar. We invite you to provide feedback on this webinar and also to provide suggestions for future webinars. In the interest of time, let's get started. We first want to acknowledge the Health Resources and Services Administration as the funding source of the AIRP. And at this time, it is my honor to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Lisa Crowan, PhD, Gender, Sexual, and Reproductive Health Node co-leader. And Dr. Crowan has been a research scientist at the Division of Research at Kaiser Permanente, Northern California since 2000, and she's also the director of the KPNC Autism Research Program. I would like to also introduce Dr. Maria Masolo, PhD, Gender, Sexuality, and Reproductive Health Node co-leader as well. And Dr. Masolo is a cultural anthropologist who has collaborated with Dr. Crowan at the Autism Research Program for 15 years. So at this time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Crowan and Dr. Maria Masolo.
Thanks very much, Josephine. And are you going to show the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Well, while she's bringing that up, I wanted to acknowledge again our funders. If you can go to the next slide. We're able to do this work with a generous support from the HRSA and Maternal and Child Health Bureau, and I'm very excited to be part of this project. Next. I've already been introduced, and next, Maria as well. So if you go to the next slide. So good afternoon, everybody. Our plan today is to give you a brief orientation to Community-Based Participatory Research, otherwise known as CBPR. I will begin by providing a brief introduction to CBPR, explaining what it is, how it's done, how it differs from traditional research approaches, and the benefits of taking this approach. Then I'm going to turn it over to Maria, who will provide a brief history of CBPR in health research, including the establishment of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI. And then Maria is will go into a little bit more depth discussing the application of CBPR in autism research, providing an overview of the groundbreaking work done by AASPIRE. And finally, she'll focus in on the work that we're doing in the AARP Gender, Sexuality, and Reproductive Health Node. Next. So to start, what is CBPR? Here's a definition that was written in 2004, which stated that community-based participatory research is a collaborative research approach that is designed to ensure and establish structures for participation by communities affected by the issues being studied, and representatives of organizations and researchers in all aspects of the research process. And the goal is to improve health and well-being through taking action, including social change. There's also a nice description of CBPR on the AASPIRE website, which states that CBPR is an approach to scientific inquiry in which scientific professionals and members of a specific community work together as equal partners to develop, implement, and disseminate their research. And as a form of action research, CBPR projects, they aim to make changes in the world that are desired by the community. In a CBPR project, the lived experience of community members and the academic learning of scientific professionals are valued as equally powerful sources of knowledge. So you'll keep hearing us repeat this notion of equality and equal partnership. That's really the foundation of CBPR. And community academic partners are expected to learn from each other and respect each other's expertise. So that, again, I pulled that nice definition from the AASPIRE website, which Maria will tell you a little bit more about when she starts speaking. And I want to emphasize that CBPR is just one kind of participatory research. Next. So the key elements of CBPR involve equitably involving all partners in the research process. So all partners, researchers, and community members are informed, included, and involved in all aspects of the research process, from the design to the implementation to the dissemination of the research results. And researchers and community members learn from each other throughout the research process, as I already said. CBPR begins with a research topic of importance to the community. So this is very different from the sort of traditional approach to research, where research ideas start with the researchers. And then a CBPR combines knowledge and action for social change to improve community health and eliminate health disparities. And here I want to point out that the emphasis here is on improving community health rather than sort of the health of an individual in that community. And also with this goal of eliminating health disparities. And finally, which I've mentioned already, that the CBPR disseminates results to all partners and involves all partners in the disseminator, in the wider dissemination of the results. So as in traditional research approaches, findings are usually published in academic journals, and that's where it may end. In CBPR, the goal is to not only publish your findings in academic or scholarly journals, but also to release findings to the lay press and to use these findings as to influence policy, which can be done by the community advocates themselves. Next. So to sort of show this side by side, in the traditional research approach, as I've mentioned, the researcher determines the questions to be asked, the tools to be used to collect data, the mode of data collection, and what interventions might be introduced to overcome the limitations of, to improve health. Whereas in CBPR, the research begins with the research topic of importance to the community. In a traditional research approach, the research team does all the implementing, the analyzing and publishing the data. And in CBPR, it equitably involves all partners in the research process. And in a traditional research approach, data is transferred from the participant to the researcher, or sort of extracted from the participant and used by the researcher. Whereas in the CBPR approach, there's really a commitment to change this power relationship between the researcher and the researched, and to make them more equitable partners in the research endeavor. Next slide. So the benefits of CBPR, I hope you've gathered from everything I've said. It really benefits all partners, the community participants, the healthcare practitioners, and the researchers, by creating bridges between scientists and communities who the scientists study. And it facilitates the development of culturally appropriate instruments. So instruments that are designed, data collection instruments, or other modes of research methods that are really appropriate for that particular community, and that will work and provide valid data and information for the communities being studied. A mutual trust is established. when researchers and community partners work together, which enhances really the quality of the data collected and the overall quality of the research. And it affords an opportunity for researchers to gain a better understanding of the community's unique circumstances by working together with them equitably. So overall, this approach improves the quality of the research. It enhances the capacity of the communities involved in participating in research and voicing their opinions, in bringing their issues and their priorities to the fore and having something acted upon, some research done to overcome some barriers they may be experiencing or knowledge gaps that they want to fill. And ultimately, it improves health outcomes for individuals, but especially for communities. So now I'm going to turn it over to Maria to tell us about a little bit more about the history of CBPR and what we are doing specifically in our AIRP gender, sexuality, and reproductive health node in terms of community-based participatory research.
Thanks, Lisa. So regarding the history of CBPR in healthcare research, in 2000, the origins go back to 2001 when the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, AHRQ, several federal agencies and the Kellogg Foundation convened a two-day conference to promote the use of CBPR in research, develop strategies to promote it, and to explore its use in policymaking. They hoped that this approach would improve studies for both researchers and the community studied and help address problems of healthcare disparities. I want to make sure that throughout the rest of this presentation that while we're focusing on CBPR, CBPR is just one approach to inclusive research, but we're going to briefly look at another one. Next. And as Lisa mentioned, another inclusive approach is that taken by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI. You may all know that PCORI was established in 2010 by Congress as an independent nonprofit institute to do patient-centered research. And PCORI has been, since 2010, a leader in driving US clinical research to become more patient-centered. In their own words, they said that they focus on outcomes that matter to patients. PCORI is also one of the leading institutes to fund this kind of patient-centered research. To give you an idea, since 2010, they have spent about $3 billion to fund over 2,000 research and other related projects. In 2019, PCORI was reauthorized by Congress, and at that point, they added additional research priorities. PCORI funds primarily clinical effectiveness research, CER, projects, and they also fund awards to promote engagement in research, dissemination and implementation projects, methodology research, and the development of research infrastructure, including PCORNet, the National Patient-Centered Clinical Research Network. Next. I think that calls for inclusive research continue in the field of autism. You have an example on the slide of a call by Elizabeth Pelicano who, in 2020, who is asking, I'm going to read it because I think it's a valuable call to inclusive research and to respond to the needs and priorities of the community. She says, quote, "The vast preponderance of autism research worldwide still focuses on the underlying genetic causes and biology of autism." And this is from an earlier writing by Pelicano. This focus is in sharp contrast to the stated research priorities of community members, autistic people, their family members, educators, clinicians, and other professionals who have consistently called for research in areas of more immediate practical concern, including interventions, education, services, and supports. Even more recently, there was a call by Jerry Dawson and other prominent researchers asking for the inclusion of autistic voices in decisions about autism research, policy, and clinical practice. So researchers continue asking, some researchers continue asking for inclusion and establishing research priorities that make sense to the community, and yet by and large, research studies are not focusing on that and are not inclusive. Next. So CBPR in autism research is not new, as we're going to see, but its adoption has been relatively slow. One exception to this, as Lisa mentioned, is AASPIRE, the Academic Autistic Spectrum Partnership in Research and Education. As early as 2006, Christina Nicolaides and Dora Raymaker at Portland State University established this collaborative that continues to do research and now has expanded to members come from the US, UK, and Australia. This is, again, a collaborative in which the academic community and the autistic community work together to conduct research projects relevant to the needs of autistic adults. And Christina Nicolaides points out, and other researchers, she's not the only one, our own research shows the same, that while autism is a lifelong condition or disability in many cases, the research continues to focus primarily on children. So AASPIRE is, again, focusing on the lives of autistic adults. The mission, as they stated, is to encourage the inclusion of autistic people in matters which directly affect them, to include autistic people as equal partners in research about autism, to answer research questions relevant to the autistic community, and to use research funding to effect positive change for autistic people. And change and effecting change is something that AASPIRE highlights and emphasizes in their work. Let's do research that is relevant and that will bring up change and improvements in the lives of autistic adults. Next. AASPIRE has a highly recommended website with tools, resources, and guidance about participatory research, accessibility, and also with discussions about neurodiversity, healthcare, employment, reproductive health, mental health, and much more. It's very simple, aspire.org easy to remember. And next. In that website, there is a great video in which Christina Nicolaides discusses participatory research step by step, and the what to do and what not to do, what to call participatory based research, and what kind of research should not be called participatory, community-based participatory research. Next. Okay, now I want to switch to our own work implementing CBPR at the Gender, Sexuality, and Reproductive Health node of the AARP. One of the first priorities Lisa and I had for our node was to create a team of researchers and autistic individuals to guide our work on this rather new area of research. We embarked on a creation of the stakeholder advisory group in the fall of 2020, so as soon as the grant was confirmed, and we started searching for candidates at that point. By early 2021, we had confirmed 6 members with whom we worked for the first 2 years of the grant. Recently, at the recommendation of the existing advisors, we added 3 new members. So our advisory group now consists of 9 members. The group is very diverse in terms of gender identity, sexual orientation, age, ethnicity, and experience. Just to give you a sense, 6 individuals have postgraduate degrees, 2 are pursuing doctorates, and all others are experienced in advocacy and community work. In sum, members bring to the team their lived experience, but also expertise, both academic and advocacy expertise to the table. Next. So one of our members at some point suggested in the first year of working together that, yeah, it's all great to have very accomplished individuals participating as researchers in our teams, but often people in the community are not prepared to participate in research, and they are never invited to participate in research in any capacity. So it would be good to build capacity, to bring capacity to the community, to bring skills and to work on skills that would be good if they were to be invited to be part of a research team. So in order to build capacity in the community, we co-produced with the research team and the advisory board, working together, co-produced a 3-unit course that we piloted in the community in February 2022, February of this year. So I'll tell you a little bit about the course. The course is quite simple, consists of 3 units. As you can see, the first unit is goes over research and basic. We established 5 basic steps of research, from developing the idea to the type of data that we need to answer the research question, to creating the methods to write a research, to implement a research project, to collecting data, analyzing, and disseminating. The second unit covers ethics in research. So anything that is required by an IRB. we spent a lot of time talking about consent and about the limits and the risks of participating in research. And we went a little bit over the ethics of doing research, really protecting human subjects. Finally, Unit 3 focused a bit more on CBPR and on the skills needed to be a research partner from the community in a research study. That is effective communication, and we spent quite a bit of time on communication and sharing ideas, working in team building first, and then working as part of a team and sharing those ideas and modifying those ideas. Each one of the units was delivered virtually. 2 hours, the classes were 2 hours long and included breakout groups in which people did the discussion, participants discussed the topics and came up with answers. And they were offered the units on 3 consecutive weeks. We had 2 goals in creating the training. One of them, as I said, was to train autistic members in the community to acquire skills needed to work in a research team. But we also had a secondary goal, which was to collect the trainees' priorities about issues related to our node, gender, sexuality, and health, to share them with a panel, an international panel of experts that is creating or drafting recommendations for policy for INSAR on these topics. So a little bit about the creation of the training. This was a really iterative process in which, from a very rough draft with some basic ideas, we went back and forth with the team, the advisors, about 6 times until we decided, okay, we're ready to give it a try in the community, to pilot it in the community. At that point, one of our advisors said, well, who is going to teach the course? And we said, good question. We had been thinking that perhaps a social worker could teach it. We were not clear. We were exploring those possibilities until we came up with, we invited someone who had been working with us already, an autistic person, who is now part of our advisory board and who is experienced in teaching workshops in the community. And they did an extraordinary job teaching this course. We partner with a community organization that provides services to adults with developmental disabilities here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And they focus on 3 main areas for their services. One of them is independent living skills, job training and job placement, and community engagement. So we worked very closely with one of the managers in the community to create all the logistics that are quite complex, and also to go over the training many times. We trained their support staff, and they did the recruitment of participants. So they recruited 13 adults, autistic adults, who showed an interest in the course. And I'm proud to say that 12 of the 13 completed all the activities. Unfortunately, one person had encountered personal issues and had to drop out of the course. Like everything else that we do, working with the community and including members in our teams, we accommodate. So we provided accommodations to, just to give an example, after the first class, one of the members wrote to us and said, well, this is all great, I love the topic, but the group class doesn't work for me. So we contacted them and we offered an individual class. A couple other members, due to conflicts with work and other activities, had to miss a class. They were provided individual makeup classes. So everybody completed the full course. As I said, supporters from EBI, the community organization, East Bay Innovations, were there to support their participants, and also they were known to the participants, so to make them feel at ease. And the two members, in addition to myself, I was there to support the instructor in case there were any specific questions about a research team. And two other members of the research side of the team, Lisa and another one of our colleagues, Jen, were there as observers, but also to provide support during breakout groups and discussion, and just to make sure that people were feeling comfortable with the discussion and sometimes needed a little guidance with the questions. So that worked out really well. The course includes an instructor manual, and currently we are working with a fantastic team of artists and graphic designers that work as a collective at Spectrum Fusion out of Texas. They're all autistic individuals, and they are illustrating our slides and creating a manual for participants. So in the future, we hope that when the course is offered, participants will also have a manual either to review in advance or after each unit is presented. By the way, before each class, the slides for the class were given to participants in advance. I also must say, as another accommodation, before the class, I personally texted every one of the participants to remind them that the class was starting in, it was like 15 minutes before the class. Finally, everybody, instructor, supporters, and participants were compensated for participating in the training. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, we had a second goal for the training, and that was to obtain priorities from the communities and ideas and questions from the community to share with the team working on the INSAR policy recommendations. At the start of Unit 3, being a community research partner, the instructor announced to the participants that they were going to be invited to share their ideas about what was important to them in terms of gender, sexuality, and health, but also questions about what they may want to know about these topics. Given the sensitivity of the topics and the possibility that some of the participants in the training may have never talked about these issues with anybody, we also offered a 45-minute bridge session before the start of the focus group. And in the bridge session, we watched short films and answered questions. And by the way, I should say that the short films were created by the National Council for Independent Living, NICIL. They are 1 to 3 minutes long, and they are all presented by disabled individuals, and they are extraordinary. They are amazing tools for sexuality and gender education. So I invite you all to check them out. They are available through YouTube. I also want to share with you that the invite to the focus groups was written in part by the instructor, the facilitator, who is also one of our advisors and an individual with an autistic individual who is also a non-binary individual, who said, wrote in the invite, sometimes people with disabilities get left out of conversations about gender and sexuality. That makes our lives harder. It makes it more likely for us to have health problems. People who study gender, sexuality, and health need to listen to us. That was what they expressed in the invitation. Again, all the participants from the training were happy and eager to register for the focus groups. In terms of implementation, both the focus groups and for the training, we used Jamboard. And I would say that Jamboard was used more during the focus groups because that was where we were capturing the ideas, the questions that participants brought up. And we also used the chat function. And finally, that both, as I said before, focus groups and the training included supporters. From Jamboard, what was really wonderful is that once the ideas were all in front of us, our facilitator has an amazing ability to synthesize ideas, and so we were grouping them together and coming up with themes. Next slide, please. And here is a taste of what came up under what we themed sex education and consent. And I'm going to read you the questions that people came up with because to give you a sense of what, again, individuals who have never been invited, have never to a research project, have never been asked for their ideas, to share their ideas, this is what they came up with. How do autistic people learn about sexuality? From whom? Friends, school, doctor, parents? How can autistic people ask the right questions about their sexuality and get the right answers? How do autistic people know who they can go to and safely ask questions about sexuality? How does sex ed line up or not line up with how autistic people experience sexuality? How do people who work with autistic individuals talk about consent? Does the way consent gets talked about make sense to autistic people? Again, this is just a taste of what ideas and questions came up. And importantly, these are voices from the community that are helping to shape up, formulate the research questions and priorities that an international group of experts are putting into policy recommendations for the International Society for Autism Research, INSAR. Next slide, please. Finally, to conclude this part of the presentation, and we hope that you will have some questions for us, I want to share a comment from the instructor of the Research Basics training that eloquently sums up the interest of community members in being involved in research and the value of a training like the one we created. And they said, it's really rewarding to do this kind of work because it was clear how much the participants want to be involved with research. There were so many things they were really passionate about, and researchers may never have asked what is important to them before. This training could provide them with tools to become researchers themselves. The instructor, Morgan Hunter, was who wrote those words. Finally, a reminder, a take home for all of us is the call from the disability rights advocates. That is a powerful reminder that research leads to better outcomes when it is participatory and inclusive. And they summarize it beautifully in saying, nothing about us without us. We hope that this has inspired some of you to work on participatory research, and we will be happy to answer questions you may have on how we did it. I want to make clear that what was CBPR for us is the work that we did with and that we continue doing with our advisory board in the creation of the training. The focus groups, in the focus groups, trainees or graduates from the training were invited as research participants. But research participants, we want to believe that were educated in what it means to be part of a research group. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. And we're very happy to answer questions, speak with people. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to engage with you. So here's one, I'll read it out loud. It says, were you able to engage minimally verbal autistics and some who have intellectual disability? Do you have advice on including them effectively?
We did the second, people with intellectual disability. Everybody who was, we asked to recruit individuals with minimally verbal, but we didn't get any takers. For people with intellectual disability, we actually did the same thing that we did for everybody. We don't make any assumptions when we do accommodations. Let me give you an example of the accommodations. Our communication with the team and with participants always follows a very carefully crafted template for email. That it has, you know, what is this email all about? A brief description of some action item, a short-term deadline, and if necessary, or if possible, a longer term deadline. And that's how communication goes out. For the people with intellectual disability during the training, their supporters, their personal supporters were there, but they mostly dealt with issues of, how to mute and unmute and this kind of thing. And after the first meeting, they knew what to do. So we really didn't have to do a lot of, we may repeat questions, we may rephrase questions. The instructor was fantastic at doing that. The other thing that the instructor had no problem doing, and that Lisa and I are learning to do, is to provide people time. You ask a question and you wait for longer than we think sometimes we wait, and wonderful things come up. So I think that those are, I mentioned before that reminders before the training worked. Even with one of our advisors, I normally send a text to point out that there is an email that should be read. Other than that, communications with one of our, with many of our advisors, for instance, to give feedback on the training, we did them via Zoom or Teams, and they were recorded, and then I organized the transcripts and got the information that way. And that's all I can think of. Lisa, can you think of anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we invited everybody to, all these, the participants in the training, to invite anybody they wanted to support them, and the staff at the community organization who recruited these participants, as Maria said, were available sort of to guide and help assist with a few of the participants. We did end up having two groups, and they were sorted initially by sort of support needs. But it turned out that the so-called higher support need group, which I unfortunately wasn't able to attend their sessions, were, Maria tells me they were incredible, and they had so much to share, as the other so-called lower support need group was. But
yeah, and I want to clarify what Lisa just said, because we didn't make that distinction. The distinction, the separation of the two groups had to do with when they were available and for the classes, and that will not interfere with their services. So the classes were not part of the services they normally receive, and we didn't want anybody to get confused about it or coerced into taking the class. So we knew that one group, a very small group, that happened to be a group that needed higher support, were available in the mornings, and the other group was available in the afternoon. But for the focus groups, everybody came together, and it was just, the results were amazing.
And I think, the thing that I really learned and was struck by, and it seems so obvious now, but it's not an accommodation per se, but having the course and the focus groups taught by and led by autistic individuals was a game-changing approach, because they, first of all, these two autistic people who are incredibly experienced leading groups and doing this kind of activity over Zoom, but they speak more the same language with the participants than I would, or a social worker in the community who's non-autistic. And they, and also the group of participants of autistic people supported each other in ways during the sessions. They asked questions of each other. They restated what they thought they heard. They helped people articulate what they were trying to say in a really beautiful way. So you know, so it was inclusive all around with the participants as well as the instructors and the supporters, and you know, it really just flowed. And as Morgan said in that quote that Maria wrote, these individuals were so thrilled to be invited to do something like this. And at the end, when the third class was over, several of them said, well, when are we meeting next? And we said, that's it. It's a 3, you know, we've done that. And they said, what do you mean? You know, they were ready to keep going, because I think it was really their participation. They had never been invited to do something like this, and it was very valuable for them. So we were really lucky with that pilot.
Yeah, and one small point to add is that people from East Bay Innovation, the support group, said to us, we had wonderful focus groups with them to debrief, and they said to us, first of all, we realize that we provide support to adults, and we never discuss these issues with them about gender and sexuality, and we don't provide support. We're learning. We have acquired a lot of resources now to work on these topics. And they also, their colleagues who were not involved with us in this pilot, really wanted to extend the group to include some of their participants, saying they can also benefit from this. And we said, well, you know, for now, we want to keep this just for autistic people, but in the future, there's no reason why this shouldn't be more open to the community.
Yeah, so I'll just add one last thing, which is, so we have this, you know, we did this first pilot of this research basic training course. We're working on ways to manualize and disseminate, and we see this as a real benefit to researchers and communities across the country who really want to engage in participatory research, and but need to find partners, you know, and it's a way to invite and train up community members to be able to participate effectively as research partners. So we're very excited. We don't know quite how we're going to package it and disseminate it, but that's our goal. I don't see any more. Oh, here's one question that just came in. What would you do differently to have success including minimally verbal autistics?
I really think that we need to be out there in the community recruiting and perhaps making it very explicit in the invites and in the recruitment process that we're looking for individuals who with minimally verbal individuals to participate in this. And I think that it will require the same kind of careful screening, for lack of a better term, that we did, screening in terms of their needs, accommodation needs, that we did when we interviewed each one of the advisory board members of our team, that we met with them and discussed at length, what do you need to be your best, to offer, to share, to make you comfortable? How do you communicate best? How do you, oftentimes in our big meetings, we have 2 big meetings a year that are working meetings, 2 hours each. Many people are not on screen, and they don't even talk. They share their ideas via chat. So someone is in charge of checking the chat and ensuring that their voices come through. So I would say that logistics are very important, and preparing for for accommodations, but primarily asking people, what do you need? What do you need to be your best in a class?
Yeah, and I think while we didn't have any minimally verbal participants in that training course, nor in our stakeholder advisory group, many people do choose to communicate by typing. Our meetings have been virtual. That's the benefit of this pandemic and forcing us all to be virtual, but it's allowed different modes of communication for people. And often we're going in between the chat and the verbal, and some people do both. And as Maria said, some people are on camera, some people are off camera. So it really works out. And it allows people to communicate and participate in what works best for them. I think we're out of time.
Are out of time. Thank you so much to our presenters for your presentation and your work in this area. We appreciate all the great questions. We encourage everyone to attend our next webinar with Dr. Denise Nunez in September. I've also included a few links in the chat if you'd like to learn more or access some of the videos. They will be archived on our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you all for your time. We ask that you also take the survey in the chat, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.